It's Alaska's first city. Welcome to Ketchikan. Ketchikan, located here, would be founded in 1885 by Mike Martin, who was sent by an Oregon canning company to take the land. But the story does not begin there. Let's head very, very far back in time. For most of history, Ketchikan and Revillagigedo Island, where it is located, would be considered territory of the Tlingit, who would seasonally fish in Ketchikan Creek, which Ketchikan would later be built at the mouth of. But the Tlingit were far from the only native groups to inhabit the area, as the Tsimshians as well as the Haida would also inhabit the lands around Ketchikan. These groups would trade, intermarry, and also war, but we don't have many specific recorded details of that as far as I could find. But things would start to change as the white guys started to show up in the 1800s, the first of these being European missionaries, who would arrive on the Alaskan coast and begin to bring their religion as well as forced assimilation to many native groups. The Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshians, the latter of which being brought to the area by the missionary Father Duncan, who attempted to found the city of New Metlatka, south of Ketchikan, would all be forced to assimilate into a European culture. Traditional dress, culture, religion, and education would all be stripped away and replaced by some more Eurocentric versions of it. Though more recently, as we'll talk about later, there has been a cultural resurgence in the area. Nobody's quite sure where the name Ketchikan actually came from. So most people say it comes from the Tlingit word Ketchikan, which means thundering wings of an eagle, which would make sense as there are a ton of eagles in the area. Other origins are a translation to the white spots on a salmon, which, of course, would make sense as Ketchikan, as you will soon see, is a salmon hotspot, as well as Khan, which means home in Tlingit, could refer to something of Kitch's Khan, but nobody really knows who Kitch would be. Regardless, things would begin to get going in Ketchikan as Mike Martin would establish the Clark and Martin General Store alongside George Clark. In 1890, there would be a slight problem for Ketchikan, as the small town of currently about 20 to 40 people was significantly smaller than their neighbor up north, Loring. Thing is, Loring also claimed that they controlled Ketchikan Creek and the salmon within it. And so a salmon war started. Fishermen were slugging it out in the Ketchikan Creek over the fish. As you might have guessed, Ketchikan did end up winning, and Loring is now nothing more but a small village about the size of what Ketchikan was at that time. Ketchikan would really start to make its name, though, as Alaska's first city in the 1890s, as the Klondike Gold Rush would start, and it would become a major waypoint for many prospective miners attempting to move up the Alaskan frontier. Many failed miners additionally would start living here, which would boost the population. The Ketchikan Spruce Mill would be started in 1903, which would make a major source of lumber production in the area, as well as act as the first power source of Ketchikan. Only a year later, the Ketchikan Shingle Mill would open, further fueling the lumber economy. Fish, mining, and lumber weren't the only things fueling the Ketchikan economy in the early 20th century, though, as steamship visitors would begin flocking up to Alaska and going through Ketchikan to view its natural beauty. Additionally, salmon wouldn't be the only fish that would start to be caught. Halibut, as well as other fish in the area, would become a major area of fishing ran mostly by Norwegian immigrants. Fortunately, though, as the population boomed, more discrimination and segregation against minorities started to occur, and the creation of areas such as Indiantown, where much of the minority population would be forced to reside in. The 1920s would see Ketchikan become home to one of the largest red light districts in all of the Northwest at the time. Located on Creek Street, the red light district would contain everything from alcohol, gambling, and prostitutes, and it would stay that way until 1954 when a propaganda campaign finally managed to close it. The 1930s would see fishing revolutionized in all of Alaska, as J.R. Heckman would invent the floating fish trap. As more fish flowed in, Ketchikan began to cement itself as a global center for salmon canning. A problem arose for much of the town's fishermen, though, as most of the fish traps were not owned by them, but instead larger corporations not based there. So they came up with a solution. Steal from the fish traps. I mean, there is not really a way to stop you. They're just kind of floating there. And these people, who would be referred to as fish pirates, would come and steal fish from the traps and resell them later. There would be one other very large problem that these fish traps would cause, and that would be massive overfishing, depopulating many fish in the local area. In 1939, Alaska would become the 49th state, and in doing so, they would almost immediately ban fishing traps. This would help re-cement local fishermen as well as keeping the fish population more stable alongside the help of multiple fisheries which began to be developed around that time. And that's kind of where Ketchikan's at today. Still a center for fishing, Ketchikan has large canneries, and it's not uncommon for people from even all the way over in East Asia to come here and can for the summer. People are finally once again learning their native language, as well as practicing many of their traditional cultural aspects. Ketchikan also boasts the world's largest collection of standing totem poles found throughout the city in many locations. That's Ketchikan. They got fish, they still have fish, and presumably in the future, they will continue to have fish. Have any interesting facts about Ketchikan, or maybe I missed something important? Feel free to put it in the comments. Or maybe you want your town to be featured in a video like this. Feel free to put that also in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing.